My brother-in-law called me a loser at family dinner and everyone let him humiliate me. I finally smiled and asked, how does it feel? Cheating on my sister, they kicked me out, but months later I came back with proof. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. I'm the middle kid of 3. My older sister Paige is 32 and my younger brother Caleb is 25. Then there's me, the one who somehow managed to be invisible despite standing 6'2" in since sophomore year of high school. Paige was always the family's golden child, valedictorian, cheerleading captain, homecoming queen, the whole made-for-TV package. Caleb was the baby, which meant he got away with everything short of arson, and I was just there, the middle chapter. Nobody remembers reading. My dad, Keith, is one of those guys who peaked in college and never got over it. He played football at Virginia Tech, blew out his knee junior year, and spent the next 3 decades telling everyone about the career he almost had. He sells commercial insurance now and acts like it's the most important job on the planet. He's loud, opinionated, and has this habit of making everything into a competition that only he's qualified to judge. My mom, Linda, is the peacekeeper. She spent her entire marriage smoothing over my dad's rough edges, and somewhere along the way, she forgot that keeping the peace and keeping things fair aren't the same thing. Growing up, the favoritism wasn't even subtle. Paige could do no wrong. If she got a B+, it was the teacher's fault. If I got an A, it was because I should have gotten an A. When Paige wanted to go to an out-of-state college, my parents took out loans without blinking. When I brought up the idea of studying computer science at a school in North Carolina, my dad told me to be realistic and go to community college first, so I did. I transferred, I graduated, and then I got a job in IT that slowly turned into a career in cybersecurity consulting. But none of that seemed to register with my family. To them, I was still the kid who went to community college while Paige went to James Madison. Now, let me introduce you to the real catalyst of this whole disaster, my sister's husband, Todd. With the white teeth and the firm handshake and the polo shirts with the little horse on them. Todd, who sells pharmaceutical equipment and talks about it like he's performing open-heart surgery. Todd, who drives a leased BMW and acts like he built it himself in his garage. Todd moved into our lives about 4 years ago when Paige started dating him. And from day one, my dad treated him like the son he always wanted. They'd sit on the back porch drinking bourbon and talking about the market like they were on CNBC. My dad would clap him on the shoulder and say things like, "This one's going places," while I was literally sitting right there, having just closed a contract worth more than Todd's entire quarterly bonus. It wasn't just my dad either. The whole family dynamic shifted when Todd arrived. Suddenly, every holiday was about accommodating Todd's schedule. Every conversation at the dinner table circled back to Todd's work, Todd's opinions, Todd's fantasy football team. I'm not exaggerating when I say my mother once interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Todd if he wanted more sweet tea. I was telling them I'd gotten a promotion. She didn't even hear the word promotion. She heard Todd's glass was empty. Here's what made it worse. Todd knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just passively enjoying the attention. He was actively positioning himself as the alpha of the family. He'd make these little digs at me, always wrapped in a joke so nobody could call him on it. Things like, "Anthony, you still doing that computer stuff, man? I couldn't sit at a desk all day. I'd lose my mind." Or my personal favorite, "Hey, Anthony, when are you going to get a real office? Or do you just work from your couch in your underwear?" And everyone would laugh. My dad would laugh the hardest. I let it slide for years. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I'm the guy who returns the wrong order at a restaurant and then eats it anyway, because I don't want to make the waitress feel bad. But there's a difference between being easygoing and being a doormat. And I was starting to realize I crossed that line a long time ago. The thing that people don't tell you about being the overlooked kid is that it doesn't just go away when you grow up. It follows you. It sits in the back of your head during every family gathering, whispering that maybe they're right. Maybe you really aren't that impressive. And then you go home and look at your life, your career, your apartment, your savings account, and you think, no, actually, I'm doing fine. Better than fine. But the next time you sit down at that dinner table, the whisper starts right back up again. About 6 months before the dinner that blew everything up, something happened that I need to tell you about because it's important. I was visiting Paige and Todd's house to drop off a birthday present for their daughter, my niece, Lily. She just turned 4, and I'd gotten her this massive stuffed elephant that was almost as big as she was. I walked in through the garage because the front door was locked, and I heard Todd on the phone in the kitchen. He didn't know I was there, and what I heard him say stopped me dead in my tracks. He was talking to someone laughing, and he said, "Yeah, she's clueless. I'm telling you, man, Paige doesn't check anything. I've got more freedom than a teenager with a fake ID." Then he laughed again and said something I couldn't quite make out, but it ended with, "What she doesn't know keeps this whole thing running smoothly." I stood there in the garage holding a giant stuffed elephant, feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. Now I didn't know for sure what he was talking about. Could have been finances, could have been a surprise party. Could have been something completely innocent, but the way he said it, the tone, the secrecy, the smugness, it didn't sit right with me. I filed it away in the back of my mind and walked in like I hadn't heard anything. I gave Lily her elephant-made small talk and went home, but I started paying more attention to Todd after that, and what I noticed over the next few months made that phone call a lot harder to dismiss as nothing. The family dinner that changed everything was a Sunday in late October. My mom had made pot roast, which she only does for special occasions, or when she's trying to pretend everything is fine. And based on the general tension in the house when I walked in, I'm guessing it was the latter. Paige and Todd were already there. Caleb had driven up from Blacksburg. My dad was in his recliner watching football and offering commentary that nobody asked for, and I walked in carrying a bottle of wine and a bad feeling that I couldn't quite name. If I'd known what was going to happen in the next 2 hours, I would have brought something a lot stronger than wine. Dinner started out the way it always does at my parents' house, which is to say my dad was holding court like he was hosting a talk show, and the rest of us were the studio audience. He was going on about some deal he'd just closed at work, and Todd was right there feeding him follow-up questions, like a trained seal balancing a ball on its nose. "Keith, that's incredible. How did you get the client to come around?" Meanwhile, my mom was shuttling food from the kitchen to the dining room like she was catering her own event, and Paige was on her phone pretending to listen to everyone while actually scrolling through something. I helped my mom bring out the last of the dishes because that's what I do. I'm the one who helps. I'm the one who clears the table and loads the dishwasher and takes out the trash while Todd sits there picking his teeth and talking about himself. But sure, I'm the loser. We all sat down. My mom said grace. My dad carved the roast like he was performing surgery. And for about 15 minutes, things were fine normal. Caleb was telling us about his engineering classes. I was asking him about a project he'd been working on. And then Todd, because Todd can't let a conversation happen without inserting himself into the center of it, turned to me and said, "So, Anthony, what's new with you? Still doing the freelance thing?" Now I need to explain something. I don't do freelance. I haven't done freelance in 3 years. I work full-time for a cybersecurity firm based in Arlington. I've told Todd this multiple times. I've told everyone at this table multiple times, but Todd calls it the freelance thing because it makes it sound smaller, less serious, like I'm selling handmade candles on the internet. I took a breath and said, "I'm not freelance, Todd. I work for Alder Creek Security, same company for the past 3 years." And I said it calmly. No edge, no attitude, just a correction. Todd smirked. He actually smirked, and then he looked around the table like he was about to deliver a punchline and said, Right the computer thing. Hey man, no judgment. Not everyone's cut out for the real world. Some people are desk guys." Then he took a bite of pot roast and winked at my dad, and my dad laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full, genuine laugh like Todd had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. My mom looked down at her plate. Caleb stared at his water glass, and Paige smiled the way she always smiles when Todd says something awful. This tight little grin that says she knows it's wrong, but she's not going to be the one to say it. I sat there for a moment. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I swallowed it. I've been swallowing it for years. What's one more time, right? So I just nodded and said, "Sure, Todd, I'm a desk guy." But Todd wasn't done. He never is. He leaned back in his chair, put his arm around Paige and said, "I'm just messing with you, man. But seriously, when are you going to get out there and make some real moves? You're almost 30. I had a house and a wife by your age. You've got, what, an apartment and a cat? I don't even have a cat. I'm allergic." My dad jumped in at that point. "Todd's got a point, Anthony. You've been coasting for a while now. When your sister was your age, she was already married. What's your plan?" I looked at my dad, the man who didn't help me pay for a single semester of college, who didn't come to my graduation, forgot my 27th birthday, and he was asking me what my plan was while sitting next to a guy who leases everything he owns and calls it success. "My plan is fine, Dad," I said. "I'm doing well. Doing well is what people say when they don't want to admit they're stuck," Todd said. "No offense. Then why say it if it's offensive? Because someone's got to tell you the truth, man." Todd looked at my dad for approval. My dad gave him a nod, an actual nod, and then Todd dropped the bomb. He set down his fork, looked directly at me and said, "Look, Anthony, I'm saying this because I care about you. You're a good guy, but at some point you've got to look in the mirror and ask yourself why you're almost 30 and you've got nothing to show for it. No wife, no kids, no house, just a desk and a paycheck. That's not a life, man. That's a holding pattern." And honestly, he paused, looked around the table like he wanted an audience for this next part. "Honestly, you're kind of a loser." He said it right there at the dinner table with pot roast on the plates and a centerpiece my mom had spent an hour arranging. He called me a loser. The table went quiet. My mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Caleb's jaw tightened. Paige looked at Todd with an expression that was half embarrassment and half loyalty, like she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to contradict him in front of everyone. "And my dad." My dad chuckled. Not a big laugh this time, just a soft chuckle like he was trying to suppress it but couldn't quite manage. And that chuckle did more damage than anything Todd had said because Todd was an outsider. Todd was some guy who'd married into my family and decided he was better than me. But my dad was supposed to be on my team, and he was laughing. Something broke in me, not in a dramatic cinematic way, not like a dam bursting or a volcano erupting, more like a wire snapping. One of those internal wires that keeps you polite, that keeps you civil, that keeps you showing up to these dinners and smiling through the insults and pretending everything is fine, because that's what family does. The wire snapped, and I looked at Todd and I smiled. You know what, Todd? You're right. You've got a house and a wife and a BMW and the whole picture perfect setup. Congratulations. Real impressive. I paused. I took a sip of water. But I've got to ask you something, and I've been curious about this for a while. Todd looked at me, still smirking, still confident. What's that? How does it feel? I said, my voice cutting through the suddenly thick air, being boyfriend number 11. The smirk disappeared, not slowly, instantly, like someone had wiped it off his face with a rag. What did you just say? Todd asked. Boyfriend number 11, I repeated. Or is it 12? I honestly lost count. But I figured since you're so concerned about my life, maybe we should talk about yours for a minute. The whole table went dead silent. My mom set her fork down completely. Caleb leaned back in his chair like he was trying to physically distance himself from the blast radius, and Paige looked at me with an expression that started as confusion and rapidly morphed into something a lot closer to terror. Anthony, my mom said, her voice low and warning. That's enough. No, Mom, it's really not. I looked at Todd, who had gone from smirking to pale in about 3 seconds. You want to call me a loser at this table? Fine. But maybe before you go around judging other people's lives, you should make sure your own house isn't on fire. Because from what I've seen, yours is burning pretty good. Todd stood up. His chair scraped against the hardwood floors loud. It sounded like a scream. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice was shaking. Not with anger, with fear. Paige started crying. Not loud, dramatic crying. Quiet tears rolling down her face while she stared at me like I'd just pulled a grenade out of my pocket and set it on the table. My dad was finally not laughing. He was staring at me with this expression I'd never seen before. It was something between shock and fury, like I'd broken some unspoken rule that he didn't even know existed until I shattered it. Anthony, I think you need to leave, my mom said. She said it firmly, like she'd already made up her mind. I stood up. I folded my napkin and set it next to my plate. I looked around the table at every single person who had sat there and watched Todd tear me apart for years without ever once telling him to stop. And I said, gladly. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and sat in the driveway for a full 5 minutes before I started the engine. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and I had no idea if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or the best decision I'd ever made. Turns out, it was a little bit of both. The drive home from my parents' house that night felt about 3 hours long, even though it's only 40 minutes. I kept replaying the moment in my head. Todd's face, Paige's tears, my dad's silence, my mom pointing me toward the door like I was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. I pulled into my apartment complex, parked, and just sat there in the dark, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. Here's the thing about saying something you can't take back. In the moment, it feels righteous. It feels like justice, but about 20 minutes later, when the adrenaline drains out of your body and the reality sets in, start to wonder if justice was worth the price tag. My phone started buzzing before I even got inside. My mom texted first. What you did tonight was cruel and uncalled for. Your sister is devastated. I need you to think about what kind of person you want to be. No mention of what Todd said to me. No mention of my dad laughing. Just me. I was the problem. I was always the problem. Caleb texted next. His was shorter. Dude, what was that about? Call me when you can. At least Caleb sounded more confused than angry. He was the only one at that table who'd looked uncomfortable when Todd was going after me. So I gave him credit for that. Paige didn't text. She called. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it later, her voice was raw and shaky. Anthony, I don't know what you think you know, but you had no right to do that. You humiliated Todd in front of the whole family. You humiliated me. I don't even know what to say to you right now. Click. I sat on my couch in the dark and thought about what I knew, what I actually knew versus what I suspected, and whether I just dropped a bomb based on evidence or based on a feeling. Because here's the truth. When I said boyfriend number 11 at that dinner table, I wasn't bluffing exactly, but I wasn't holding a royal flush either. I was holding maybe 2 pair and a hunch, and that scared me. Let me tell you what I had. Over the 6 months between overhearing Todd's phone call in the garage and that dinner, I'd noticed things. Small things at first. Todd was always on his phone, angled away from Paige. He'd leave rooms to take calls. He started going to the gym at weird hours, 9:30 on a Tuesday night, 7:00 in the morning on a Saturday when he usually slept until 10:03. He changed his phone passcode 3 times in 2 months. I only knew that because Lily had tried to play a game on his phone at Thanksgiving, and he'd snatched it away from her so fast you'd think it was a loaded weapon. Then there was the thing at Christmas. I'd gone to pick up my jacket from the guest room at Paige and Todd's house, and Todd's Apple Watch was sitting on the dresser. A notification popped up. It was a text from someone saved as Brett from work that said, "Last night was amazing." Same hotel next week. Now look, I'm not naive enough to think every suspicious text is proof of an affair. Maybe Brett from work is his actual coworker named Brett, and they were talking about a work conference. But combined with everything else, it painted a picture I couldn't ignore. But I didn't have proof, not real proof. And in the weeks after that dinner, I started to wonder if I'd just blown up my family over a suspicion. The guilt was suffocating. I'd wake up at 3:00 in the morning and stare at the ceiling, thinking about Paige's face when she started crying, thinking about my niece Lily, who had nothing to do with any of this, thinking about whether I'd just turned myself into the family villain because I couldn't handle being called a loser. The isolation hit fast. My mom stopped calling. My dad never started. Paige blocked me on everything within a week. The only person who still talked to me was Caleb, and even he was careful about it, like he was trying to maintain diplomatic relations between two warring countries. I threw myself into work, not because I was trying to be inspirational, but because I had literally nothing else. My social life had been built around family obligations, and now those were gone. So I worked. I took on extra projects. I stayed late. I volunteered for the kind of assignments nobody else wanted, the messy audits, the difficult clients, the systems that were held together with duct tape and prayers. And something happened that I wasn't expecting. I got really, really good at my job. Not that I was bad before, but there's a difference between doing your work and throwing yourself into it with nothing else to lose. Within 2 months, I'd earned a reputation at Alder Creek as the guy who could untangle anything. My boss, a woman named Claire, who looked like a librarian but negotiated like a lawyer, started putting me on the firm's highest profile accounts. By February, I'd been promoted, not a small promotion either. I was brought on as a senior consultant with a team of 4 people under me and a salary that would have made Todd choke on his bourbon. I didn't tell anyone in my family. There was nobody to tell. Around that same time, I reconnected with an old college friend named Drew. We drifted apart after graduation the way people do, but he'd moved to Richmond for a job and we started grabbing beers on Friday nights. Drew was one of those people who tells you the truth whether you want to hear it or not, which is exactly what I needed. One night, about 3 months after the dinner, I told Drew everything, the whole story. Todd's comments, my dad laughing, what I'd said, the fallout. Drew listened without interrupting, which for him was practically a miracle. When I finished, he took a long sip of his beer and said, "Okay, 2 things. 1, Todd sounds like a tool. 2, you can't just throw a grenade at dinner and walk away. If you've got something on this guy, you owe it to your sister to actually find out the truth. Not for revenge for her. He was right, and I hated that he was right because it meant I had more work to do. I started being more intentional about what I already knew. I wasn't going to stalk Todd or hire a private investigator or do anything that would end up making me look like the unhinged brother, but I was going to pay attention. And the universe, as it sometimes does when you start paying attention, started handing me information. The first thing that happened was Caleb called me in March. I was being cautious, but he told me something that made my stomach drop. He'd been at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, the dinners I was no longer invited to, and Todd had shown up late. When Paige asked where he'd been, Todd said he'd been at a client meeting. But Caleb had driven past the restaurant where Todd supposedly was, and it was closed. Had been closed for renovation for 2 weeks. Caleb didn't confront anyone about it. He just told me. The second thing happened in April. I got a LinkedIn message from a woman named Jenna who worked at the same medical supply company as Todd. She said she'd found my profile through a mutual connection and wanted to connect. Normal enough. But then she sent a follow-up message that said, "Hey, are you Paige's brother? I think we should talk." I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't respond right away. I sat on it for 2 days because I wanted to make sure I was doing this for the right reasons. Was I trying to help my sister, or was I trying to prove a point? Was I trying to protect Paige, or was I trying to vindicate myself for what I'd said at that dinner? Honestly, it was both, and I decided that both was good enough. I wrote Jenna back, "Yeah, I'm Paige's brother. What's going on?" Her response came in 20 minutes, and it changed everything. Not just the situation with Todd, it changed the entire trajectory of what happened next. Because what Jenna told me wasn't just confirmation of what I suspected, it was worse. A lot worse. But before I could even process that information, something else happened. Something I never saw coming. And it came from the last person I expected. My dad called me. My dad calling me was about as expected as a blizzard in July. Keith Mitchell doesn't call people. He summons them. He makes pronouncements. Hawush waits for you to come to him because in his mind, he's always the one who's been wronged, even when he's the one who did the wronging. So when I saw Dad flash across my phone screen on a Tuesday evening in mid-April, I genuinely thought someone had died. "Anthony," he said. "No hello, no how are you. Just my name, like he was confirming I existed. Dad." There was a pause, a long one. I could hear him breathing, and in the background, the low murmur of whatever news channel he'd been watching. Then he said something that almost knocked me off my chair. "I think something's going on with Todd." I waited. I didn't jump in. I've learned that with my dad, silence is more effective than talking. If you talk, he argues. If you're silent, he fills the space. "Your mother and I had them over last weekend," he continued. "Todd was on his phone the whole time. Paige seemed off. Quiet. She looks tired. Anthony thin, not healthy thin. Another pause. Your mother thinks I'm imagining things. But I'm not imagining things. I sat there processing the irony of my father, the man who had laughed when Todd called me a loser, the man who had spent years treating Todd like the golden son-in-law, calling me to say he was worried. Parts of me wanted to say something sharp, something like, "Oh, so now you want to talk to me." But Drew's voice was in my head. "This isn't about you. This is about Paige." "Dad," I said carefully, "I think you're right, and I think it's worse than you think." I told him the basics. Not everything, not about Jenny yet, just about the phone call I'd overheard in the garage, the text I'd seen on Todd's watch, what Caleb had noticed about the closed restaurant. My dad went quiet in a way I'd never heard from him before. Heath Mitchell is never quiet. The man has an opinion about everything from tax policy to the correct way to grill a burger. But right then on that phone call, he was silent for so long, I checked to make sure the call was still connected. "Why didn't you tell us?" he finally asked. "When Dad, before or after you laughed when he called me a loser, before or after Mom told me to leave?" He didn't answer that. He just said, "What do we do?" And that was the moment I realized that my dad, for all his bluster, for all his favoritism, for all his years of making me feel like I wasn't enough, was scared. Not for himself, for Paige. And as angry as I was at him, as hurt as I still was, I couldn't weaponize that fear because I was scared for Paige too. I told him to sit tight and let me figure some things out. Then I called Jenna. We met for coffee at a quiet spot in downtown Roanoke. Jenna was in her mid-30s, professional, clearly nervous. She ordered a chamomile tea and held the cup with both hands like she was bracing herself. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything," she started. "Then why did you reach out?" She sighed. "Because I've been watching this happen for over a year and it's eating me alive. I work in Todd's department. Everyone there knows." She told me what everyone knew. Todd had been having an affair with a woman named Meredith who worked in their company's Charlotte office. Not a casual thing. A sustained, ongoing relationship that had been happening for at least 14 months. They'd meet at conferences at hotel rooms in cities where Todd claimed to have client dinners, and occasionally right in Roanoke when Paige was visiting her friend in Charlottesville. Todd's manager didn't care as long as Todd hit his numbers. She showed me text screenshots that a mutual coworker had shared with her. I won't get into the details because they made me sick, but they were explicit enough that there was zero room for misinterpretation. This wasn't flirting. This was a full-blown affair, and Todd wasn't even trying to hide it from his coworkers. He was only hiding it from Paige. I thanked Jenna. I told her I'd keep her out of it as much as possible, and then I drove home and sat on my couch for 2 hours thinking about what to do next. Here's where I could have gone wrong. I could have gone straight to Paige. I could have forwarded her the screenshots. I could have blown the whole thing up right then and there and let the chips fall. But I'd already learned that dropping bombs without a plan leads to me being the bad guy. So I decided to be strategic about it, not for revenge for Paige. But I'd be lying if I said a small part of me didn't want Todd to experience even a fraction of the humiliation he'd been dishing out at every family dinner for the past 4 years. I called Drew. I called Caleb, and I called my dad, for people who for different reasons all wanted the same thing. The truth delivered in a way that couldn't be denied, dismissed, or spun by Todd's silver tongue. Drew was the strategist. "You can't just hand Paige a bunch of screenshots from some coworker she's never met," he said. "Todd will say it's fabricated. He'll turn it around on you. You need something she can't argue with." Caleb was the recon. He was still going to family dinners, still maintaining his position as the neutral party. He started paying closer attention to Todd's movements, his excuses, his schedule. Within 2 weeks, Caleb had documented 4 separate instances where Todd claimed to be somewhere he wasn't. A client meeting that didn't exist, a gym visit when the gym was closed for maintenance, a Saturday morning golf game when it was pouring rain. My dad was the hardest piece of this puzzle. Working with Keith Mitchell requires patience. I didn't know I had. He wanted to confront Todd immediately, like physically show up at his office and demand answers. I had to talk him down twice. "Dad, if you go in guns blazing, Todd will play the victim and Paige will side with him. We have to do this right." "Since when did you get so calm about things?" my dad asked. "Since I realized that being angry and being effective aren't the same thing," I said. And I think that was the first time my dad ever really looked at me. Not at the kid who went to community college. Not at the son who wasn't Todd. At me. The plan came together in May. Caleb had tracked Todd's pattern and confirmed he was meeting Meredith every other Thursday when he told Paige he had a late client dinner in Lynchburg. Jenna had provided enough corroborating evidence that we didn't need Todd to confess. We just needed Paige to see it with her own eyes. The idea was simple. On the next Thursday that Todd was supposedly in Lynchburg, Caleb would invite Paige and Lily over to my parents' house for a casual dinner. I'd be there too, which would be the first time I'd been back since the October blow-up. While Paige was at my parents' house, my dad would casually suggest calling Todd to join them. When Todd inevitably said he was stuck at his client dinner, Caleb would pull up the location sharing feature that Todd didn't know was still active on the family phone plan my dad had set up years ago. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a spy movie, it was just a family sitting together looking at a map on a phone screen and seeing that the man who claimed to be in Lynchburg was actually at a hotel in Roanoke 12 minutes from their house. We set the date, Thursday, May 15th. Caleb confirmed Todd's pattern held. Jenna had flown in from Charlotte that Wednesday just in case. Everything was in place. The only question was whether I could sit across the table from my sister knowing what was about to happen to her world and keep my composure long enough to let the truth do what it needed to do. I didn't sleep the night before. I just lay there in the dark, thinking about Paige, about the sister who used to let me borrow her CDs in middle school, who taught me how to slow dance before my first homecoming, who called me from college just to tell me she missed me. The sister who had somehow ended up married to a man who didn't deserve to carry her grocery bags. This wasn't revenge. This was rescue. At least that's what I kept telling myself as the sun came up on May 15th and I got ready to drive back to my parents' house for the first time in 7 months. Walking into my parents' house on May 15th felt like walking onto a stage. My mom opened the door, settled on a stiff nod and a quiet Anthony. I nodded back. Mom. 7 months of silence condensed into a 2-word exchange. Lily ran up to me and threw her arms around my legs like I was a long-lost hero. She immediately started telling me about her new fish, a beta named Sparkle, who apparently had a bad attitude. I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. Paige watched me from the couch. She didn't get up or smile, but she didn't leave the room either. She looked exactly like my dad had described, tired, thin circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite cover. My chest ached looking at her. Caleb was playing his part perfectly casual, easy. My dad was in the kitchen actually helping my mom with dinner, which was something I'd never seen before. Apparently, impending family crisis had given Keith Mitchell the ability to chop vegetables. Dinner was quiet by Mitchell standards. No one was performing. Lily carried the conversation, which is impressive for a kid who still confuses Thursday with Saturday. About 45 minutes in, my dad set down his fork and looked at Paige. Why don't you call Todd and tell him to come by? We've got plenty of food. Paige hesitated. He's in Lynchburg tonight. Client dinner. On a Thursday, my mom asked, and I could tell she'd been coached because my mother has never in her life questioned anyone's schedule. Yeah, it's this big account he's been working on, Paige said. But she said it the way people say things. They've repeated so many times, the words have lost their meaning, like a prayer you recite without thinking about what it actually says. Just try him, Caleb said, pulling out his phone. Maybe he can swing by on his way home. Paige called Todd. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She texted him. 5 minutes later, he replied. She read it out loud without anyone asking. Stuck in Lynchburg. This dinner's running long. Don't wait up. My dad looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at me. I nodded. Paige, Caleb said gently. He pulled up the family location app on his phone, the one Todd apparently forgot existed because he'd never bothered to remove himself from the family plan my dad set up when Caleb was still in high school. He turned the screen toward Paige. Todd's little blue that was sitting on a hotel on Franklin Road in Roanoke 12 minutes from where we were sitting. Paige stared at the screen. She didn't say anything for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 10 seconds. Then she looked up at Caleb and said, "That's gotta be a glitch." "It's not a glitch, honey," my dad said, and the way he said it soft and sad with none of his usual bluster. That's when Paige's face started to change. The denial cracked. The defensive posture she'd been holding for months, maybe years, started to crumble. How long, she whispered. She wasn't asking Caleb. She was looking at me. "At least 14 months, I said. "Her name is Meredith. She works in his company's Charlotte office. Multiple people at his work know about it." Paige's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry the way she'd cried at the October dinner. That had been shock and embarrassment. This was something deeper. This was the sound of a wall coming down, a wall she'd built to protect herself from what she probably already knew on some level but couldn't afford to face. "The October dinner," she said slowly. "When you said boyfriend number 11, you knew then." "I suspected," I said. "I didn't have proof. I shouldn't have said it the way I said it. I'm sorry for that, but you were right." Yeah, I was right. My mom was crying silently at the end of the table, holding a napkin to her face. My dad had his hand on Paige's shoulder, and for once, he wasn't performing. He was just being her dad. Caleb sat quietly, letting the moment happen without trying to fix it. Lily, bless her heart, looked up from her chicken nuggets and said, "Why is everyone sad? Did Sparkle die?" Paige let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled Lily onto her lap. "No, baby. Sparkle is fine." What happened next was Paige's decision. Nobody told her what to do. She sat at that table, held her daughter, and made her own choice. She called Todd. He didn't answer the first time. She called again. "Hey, babe, I told you I'm in Lynch. I know where you are, Todd." Her voice was shaking but steady. "I'm looking at your location right now. You're at the Marriott on Franklin Road, 12 minutes away." And I know about Meredith. The silence on the other end of that phone was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Todd launched into every excuse in the book. It was a misunderstanding. The location was wrong. Meredith was just a colleague. He actually said, "Baby, who told you this? Was it Anthony? Because you know he's had it out for me since." "Stop." Paige cut him off. "Don't come home tonight. I'll have your things on the porch by morning." She hung up, set the phone on the table, and then she looked at me. "Thank you," she said. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything that had gone unsaid between us for years. Every dinner where she'd let Todd insult me and said nothing. Every time she'd chosen his version of reality over mine. Every phone call she didn't make and every text she didn't send during those 7 months I'd been exiled from the family. "You're my sister," I said. That's all there is to it. The aftermath unfolded over the next several weeks. Paige filed for divorce in June. Todd tried to fight it, hired some hotshot attorney in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. But Paige's lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Cohen, who Caleb's girlfriend had recommended, was sharper and way more prepared. When Todd saw the text evidence, the location records, and the sworn statements from 2 coworkers, his attorney told Todd to settle and save himself the embarrassment. Todd settled. Paige got the house, full custody of Lily, and a financial arrangement that made Todd's leased BMW feel like the joke it always was. Todd moved into an apartment across town. Meredith dumped him 2 weeks after everything came out. Turns out she wasn't interested in the version of Todd that came without a house, a wife who did everything for him, and the comfortable life that made him seem like a catch. The guy who called me a loser for having just an apartment and a paycheck was now the one with just an apartment and a paycheck, except mine came with a promotion and a clear conscience. My dad and I had a conversation in July that I'll never forget. We were sitting on his back porch, the same porch where he used to drink bourbon with Todd, and he said, "I owe you an apology, Anthony. Not just for the dinner, for a lot of things, for a lot of years. I didn't make him grovel. That's not who I am. But I didn't let him off easy either. I said, 'Dad, I needed you to see me, not Todd, me. And you didn't for a really long time.'" He nodded. His eyes were red. Heath Mitchell does not cry, but he was close. "I see you now," he said. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a movie scene where years of damage get repaired in one conversation, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start is everything. Paige and I rebuilt slowly. She apologized for letting Todd treat me the way he did. I apologized for the way I handled the October dinner. We agreed. As for me, I'm doing more than fine. Claire offered me a partnership track that would have made past Anthony's head spin. I started dating a woman named Sophie, who I met through a cybersecurity conference. And she's the kind of person who makes you realize that being patient about finding the right relationship isn't the same as being behind in life. Lily calls me Uncle Ant and makes me watch the same movie about a singing fish every time I visit. It's the best part of my week. Last month, Paige and I were sitting on her porch while Lily chased fireflies in the yard. And Paige said, "You know, Todd used to tell me you were jealous of him. That's why you were always quiet at dinners. He said you resented his success." I laughed, actually laughed. "Paige, I've never been jealous of Todd. I felt sorry for him. A guy who needs to tear other people down to feel tall was never someone I wanted to be." She smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "Sometime around boyfriend number 11, I said. She threw a pillow at my head and then she laughed too. And it was the kind of laugh that told me we were going to be okay, all of us, scarred and messy and imperfect, but okay. Todd, if you're reading this, and I seriously doubt you are because reading was never really your strong suit, I've got one thing to say to you. Thanks for calling me a loser at that dinner table. It was the push I needed to stop being polite and start being honest. You did me the biggest favor of my life and you didn't even mean to. That's the most Todd thing I've ever heard. And to everyone else out there sitting at a dinner table swallowing insults because you think that's what family requires, let me tell you something. It's not. Family requires respect. Family requires honesty. And sometimes family requires looking the golden boy dead in the eye and asking him how it feels being boyfriend number 11. Trust me, the silence at that table is worth it.